I was just at the grocery store because it's supposed to snow tonight, like, heavily.
Mhm.
So, me and the entire population of my city were at the grocery store. But I went with Abby because they were also going shopping, and I got, first of all, recognized by, somebody who went to so I was wearing
Mhm.
my sweatshirt. He was in he was like, "Oh, is that a hi sweatshirt from the college?" And, I was like, "Yep." And he goes, "It's class of 1994." And I was like, "I'm class of 20." Hello. And then I was over by the eggs,
Mhm.
and this older gay man in a purple, like a light lavender, button-down shirt and a wonderful tie and earrings comes up and, like, looks at all the eggs and just kinda gives a deep sigh as he's like, and he was instructing his partner to go, like, get in line. He's like, "I'll get eggs and I'll come join you."
Mhm.
And I turned to him and I was like, "How many types of eggs does one person need?" Because he was, like, looking at each type of eggs,
Mhm.
like, clearly, like, dismissing several, and he goes, "Well, and they're so expensive, and nothing is all of the, like, little ones, you can just get the 18 racks now." I guess everyone's already gotten to the smaller ones, and they're all so expensive. He goes, "Thought the price of eggs was why we're getting a new president."
Oh my
In,
god.
like, the most disdainful tone of voice, and then gave another deep sigh, selected some eggs, and walked off, and I was like, "I wanna be your friend."
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Um, I love a grocery store encounter with other queers.
Mhm. Yesterday, Miles and I were walking the dog on the bike path, and we were passed in the opposite direction by this family that was two lesbians and their probably 3-year-old who they were pushing in this folding wagon thing, and they were all wearing matching Cotopaxi jackets. And I saw them from a distance and immediately knew, and then I saw them even closer, and I was just looking at them and looking at Miles, and I was like, "Do they know? Did they see us? Do they know that we're also gay?" And Miles was like, "Yes, I think they know." Although they did make a point. They were like, "Yeah, as I continue to experience more side effects from tea, we're eventually going to circle back around from gal pals to gay man and his platonic lesbian bestie." And I thought that was delightful.
That is delightful.
Little do the people know. It is a queerness of which the cishet mind cannot conceive.
Historians would call them close friends. Besties, even. Oh,
But I do enjoy inspiring some amount of confusion in the general public when I'm out with people in my close circle. It's fun.
no, I think it's kind of essential to make the non-queers understand that we are here and we are experiencing loves and relationships and paradigms beyond their imagining.
That's beautiful. That's very poetic.
Yeah, we're about to bring down the mood.
Yeah. Should we get into it?
Might as fucking well. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fandom Apprentice. My name is Rin. I am one of your hosts. I read Lord of the Rings as a child frequently, and it had a profound effect on how I experience the world, on my love of fantasy, on just how I go about my life today, and decided to share that with my dear friend, Sam.
That's me. I'm Sam. I'm the other one. I have now, as of this recording, read all the books. Asterisk, because we haven't read the appendices yet. Those will be for a later episode. But in terms of plot of the main 3 or 6, if you're being pedantic about it, Lord of the Rings books, I have now read them all. And ah, 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 It's going to be hard. I have taken more notes for this episode than I think I have for any other episode. And I still don't know how much I'll be able to articulate about it because it destroyed me in a good way, question mark.
Yeah, I have 11 pages of notes for the Scouring of the Shire alone.
Oh my God.
So, today, dear listener, we have reached actually the last stage of our journey.
Mhm.
And today we are going to be discussing Chapter 8, Book 6, The Scouring of the Shire. And if we have time, we'll discuss the Grey Havens, but I doubt it.
We'll see. We'll see. Because like we said, we have a lot of fucking notes. And it's the end of the book, so we don't want to rush this. So, full disclosure also, not that this will likely matter or be noticeable to anyone but me, but I did read these chapters before taking notes on them. Usually I'll read and take notes as I go. And so then it's my full first impressions. But for these, it's the end of the journey. I just wanted to read them slash have them read to me. So these were written after going back and having some idea of what would happen. So there's probably a lot less in all caps than there would be otherwise, but it will still be emphatic.
Yeah. I want to mention, because I think it's important, particularly for this chapter. As I was reading back through this chapter yesterday and today, I was struck by, unfortunately, how relevant it is. We are recording this the day before Trump's inauguration in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And there is fires in California and fears of rising authoritarianism over the next several years. And I think there will be quite a few points in this chapter where that is relevant. And as we've said in previous episodes, we know not what horrors will be inflicted between now and when this episode comes out. As of today, TikTok is down in the States.
I was just about to mention that as much as we personally don't like TikTok, it still is important. I remember reading something about the reason that Congress wanted to ban it, as opposed to any other big Chinese platforms that are big in America, is just because of the way that it allowed people to communicate and spread anti-American sentiments, which is great. It's
I mean,
great.
it's xenophobia is what it is.
Yeah, it's not
It's
good.
just racism um, at its core. I think sort of some of the central themes of this chapter really are about authoritarianism and the necessity of community.
Hmm.
So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I thought it was important for us to bring up here at the start. This is not going to be us, having a happy, calm little romp through the end of this book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there is, some difficult topics being discussed, and we're going to connect those to real life.
Hmm.
That said, this is my favorite chapter in the entirety of Lord of the Rings.
I would love to know before we get into it, what about it makes this your favorite chapter? Because it is really different, I think, from the rest of the books. It's very unique. But I want to know why
Mhm.
specifically you were so hype about it, because you had been talking about this chapter for basically since we started this book.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I connected to it so much as a kid. I think, as a wee child, I was, really into like the Revolutionary War and shit.
Of
I was a
course you
history
were.
buff. Of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
so was I. Did you watch Liberty's Kids on PBS?
Fuck yes, I did.
Fucking loved it. It's my favorite propaganda. It was so good.
Mhm. Mhm. But I sort of really enjoyed the like revolutionary aspect of this
Hmm.
chapter. And I liked just the focus on the hobbits. We've had such a huge ensemble cast that even when they were sort of split off into their own separate journeys, I felt like we weren't getting as much of them as a group of friends, as a family, as we do
Mhm.
in this chapter.
Yeah.
I think we learn a lot about the hobbits and how much they've grown in this chapter,
Yeah.
both physically in the case of Merry and Pippin and emotionally. So yeah, I really loved this chapter as a kid. I was very, very upset the first time that I watched the movies and it wasn't there.
Mhm.
Both this and Tom Bombadil, which, like, I understand why it was cut, but I do think in many ways this chapter is essential to the overall story of Lord of the Rings and sort of the overall tale that Tolkien is trying to tell. And again, thinking about applicability,
Mhm.
we'll talk about this more throughout the chapter, but I think you can't read this without thinking about Tolkien's background and military service
Yeah, absolutely.
and his own thoughts and impressions and experiences coming back from the war into a changing England.
Mhm.
In a previous episode, I know that I read the introductory paragraph of The Guns of August, which is just about the month of August of 1914 at the beginning of the war. So gorgeous was the spectacle on the May morning of 1910, when 9 kings rode in the funeral of Edward VII of England, that the crowd, waiting in hushed and black-clad awe, could not keep back gasps of admiration. And it goes through a little more, and at the end of the paragraph, you get the muffled tongue of Big Ben told 9 by the clock as the cortege left the palace. But on history's clock it was sunset, and the sun of the old world was setting in a dying blaze of splendor, never to be seen again. And I think what the Scouring of the Shire marks is very similar to what Tolkien experienced when he was coming home from the First World War. We have literally in the calendar of Middle Earth, this is the end of the Third Age, and it's the first year of the Fourth Age.
Mhm.
It is literally the end of an era.
Yeah.
And for Tolkien coming home, having grown up in a sort of more pastoral England, and then going and experiencing the industrialization of war, and then coming home to the industrialization of his country. I think that was the technological leaps that were made between when he was born in the late 1800s and when he wrote these books were so massive.
Mhm.
I think it's not something that we can discount or leave out of our interpretation of this chapter.
Yeah, absolutely.
But into the content.
Yes, just to sort of re-anchor us as to where we left off, because for our listeners, it has not been very long. For us, it's been a hot minute since we've recorded. So we just left off with Gandalf leaving the hobbits at the end of Homeward Bound, and we were left wondering about the gates. There were these new mysterious gates that nobody knew what was up with, and there had been a lot of weird vibes about the state of things in the Shire. So we are opening on that sort of apprehensive mood.
Yeah, we're kind of back to where we started. It's a full circle moment because now we're just back down to the four hobbits.
Mhm. And so they arrive at the Brandywine after nightfall, and we do see this gate in sort of our first picture. And I do like that this is also happening in the dark. It kind of adds more spookiness to it. But at either end of the bridge, there was a great spiked gate, and on the further side of the river, they could see that some new houses had been built, two-storied with narrow, straight-sided windows, bare and dimly lit, all very gloomy and unshire-like. So there's this really threatening new construction that they're faced with, this barrier to entry to their home. So this is kind of the vibe that we're starting with, and it's not great.
When they left the Shire, they left through like a secret entrance into the old forest. And so and at that point they were fleeing the Black Riders.
Mhm.
And so at this point they're coming back thinking that everything is going to be fine and peaceful. They're coming back along the main road. There's no secrecy. And then all of a sudden, boom, fucking gates.
Mhm.
And the impression that I got with gates at either end of the bridge was like, this is defensive fortification. This isn't just like a toll road. This is, they can herd you onto the bridge, shut gates at either end, and then you're in a kill box.
Mhm.
That's intentional.
And also thinking ahead to the things we learn later in the chapter, perhaps also to keep hobbits from coming out, which I think is also a valid interpretation. But they are not having any of this shit. They start banging on the gates, and somebody on the other side shouts at them to come back in the morning. And there's some back and forth between Sam and one of the guards, and the guards going, "Can't you read the notice?" And Sam basically going, "No, bitch, it's dark. How am I supposed to read your stupid ass notice in the dark? Let me in." And just, they have, and this will continue to be a theme throughout the chapter, they have stared death in the face. They are not going to let some stupid new arbitrary hobbit social norms or bureaucracy or gates get in the way of anything that they want to do. They're just going, "This is stupid. We're not having this. Let me in the fucking gate."
Well, and I also love throughout this chapter, they keep running into people that they knew before
Mhm.
and calling them the fuck out. Like here, Mary calls out Hob Hayward,
Mhm.
who is another Bucklander, and mentions that, like, you were on the Haygate, which is a way down south in Buckland. So there are gates into the Shire, but the Haygate leads into the Old Forest. So that makes sense to have like a gate in the hedge.
Mhm.
And there have been quote unquote border guards, more or less. But this is clearly unexpected. And even with border guards in the past, sort of the expectation was, oh, like you're a Shire Hobbit, you're traveling along, come in, we'll get you food and a place to rest.
Mhm. We're making sure no dangerous animals come out of the forest and into town, you know.
Right, exactly. Making sure that, we know who's left and gone into the forest so that if they're missing for too long, we can go find them.
Yeah.
Right? Register at the ranger station before you go hiking.
Poor Bob Hayward is apologetic about the whole situation, but says that they have orders from the chief not to let anyone in. And there's one of a million fucking hilarious exchanges. I had to be picky about which quotes I wrote down because they were all really good. But this one, "Chief, Chief, do you mean Mr. Lotho?" said Frodo. "I suppose so, Mr. Baggins, but we have to say just the chief nowadays." "Do you indeed?" said Frodo. "Well, I am glad he has dropped the Baggins at any rate, but it is evidently high time that the family dealt with him and put him in his place." Just so good.
I love the little exchanges. The other thing that this told me about Frodo was some of the ring corruption, the constant oppressive weight of the ring has worn off a little bit
Mhm.
because we haven't seen him be like this talkative, this sassy in a while now.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
But this scares the shit out of all the gate hobbits
Mhm.
because the chief might hear about it and also they'll wake the big man. And anyway, the big man comes out.
And it's Bill Ferny. Fuck that guy.
Yeah, Mary is like, "You motherfucker, I will kill you." And Bill Ferny, chastened, unlocks the gate and then makes a run for it. And Bill the pony gives him a nice farewell kick.
Oh, I missed that. Yes, justice for Bill the pony.
Here's the thing about bullies like Bill Ferny is they're fundamentally cowards.
Mhm.
And so in this case, like he comes out all blustering, like, "I'll give you a thrashing, I'll break your filthy little necks." And then he sees that they're all holding swords
Mhm.
and armored and armed and ready to absolutely fucking murk him. And he runs off. And bullies like Bill Ferny, they like holding power over other people and other creatures. And some absolutely will respond with violence when challenged like this, as we see later in the chapter. But in this case, like he knew he was outmatched, and the unexpectedness of hobbits standing up to him gave them the upper hand. And ultimately that comes in later too. The other ruffians don't expect the hobbits to stand up to them.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in that theme for now because I think there's a lot of examples of the Hobbit's relationship with power and things that we can discuss about it. So I want to save most of that discussion for the end, but there's a lot of different examples of power and resistance to it in this chapter in a specifically Hobbit context that I think is really interesting.
Yes. Anyway, Bill Ferny gets his ass literally kicked down the road,
Mhm.
and the travelers asked to be put up for the night, and Hobb reveals another rule against taking in people and sharing food, which immediately made me think of the US Constitution's Third Amendment against being forced to put up soldiers in your dwelling,
Mhm.
and also dividing community and making it seem like everyone must be out for themselves is a fundamentally authoritarian tactic. Ticketing groups that give food to the homeless is a fundamentally authoritarian tactic. It divides communities and it prevents us from organizing as a group.
Mhm.
I'm just going to keep peppering in little pieces of like where we see authoritarianism throughout this.
Oh, absolutely,
So,
as you should. Yes, I support this wholeheartedly. And it's also just fundamentally against Hobbit nature. Everything that we have learned about
yes.
hobbits and their culture, not only is this forbidden, there just is no food and there is no beer or pipeweed or anything to go around. It's being produced, but it's being taken by these gangs of ruffians.
Well, gatherers and sharers, quote unquote, are coming around. And this was very like anti-communist to me, very like, anti-USSR vibes, very Animal Farm
Ooh.
vibes,
My god, fucking Animal Farm.
which makes sense because that's sort of the context of an authoritarian state on the rise that Tolkien would have had in his sights at the time.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was another little piece that I noticed, particularly then when they go into the bridge house and the list of rules is on the wall.
Yeah.
And I didn't write down what their rule number 4 is, but apparently there's a rule number 4 that is shitty, and our rule 4 is much better than their rule 4.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of allusion to rules and there being some specific list of rules that's just sort of general rules that are posted everywhere and more specific rules for other situations. And we don't get a complete list of what all these rules are, but they're implied.
All it is all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yeah, that movie fucking terrified me. We watched it in the 8th grade, and there's the scene where they see old Major's head that's been cut off, and in the movie, there's just a literal actual pig head, which I know is just a food item and is not inherently scary on its own. But if you're an 8th grader, that's a very visceral, frightening image. I have beef with Animal Farm, which was not an intentional cow pun, but I'll.
I never watched the movie, but we did read the book in, I want to say, 7th grade,
Mhm.
somewhere in there.
I remember this is just now an anecdote about young teen or tween me. I think this was a little bit after Animal Farm. This was probably freshman or sophomore year of high school. But I had just noticed that communism in general was sort of this villain in all discussions about the
Mhm.
world and freedom and good governments and bad, stinky, evil communist governments. And I wasn't vibing with it. So I decided to investigate for myself and just read the Communist Manifesto on my Nook color
Same
that I
thing.
had gotten for Christmas. And I read it. And then I came back into AP US history the next day and went, hey guys, so I just read the Communist Manifesto. Don't know if any of you have, but it doesn't seem that bad. And that was not a popular sentiment, but I liked being confrontational.
No, I think in 8th grade, I think it was, I gave a presentation on the Communist Manifesto
I love you so much.
and why, communism wasn't the villain we all thought it was, and how no communist country, quote unquote, was actually communist.
Hmm.
Fucking little tanky Rin.
I also wrote a paper about how the US was weirdly obsessed with 9/11 in a non-productive, non-compassionate to the victims way, and we were just using other people as scapegoats, and it was a distraction from real injustices. I was as radical as it was possible to be in my tiny Western Massachusetts town, or I guess Central Massachusetts, even worse. But I was trying, and it was very fun.
Yeah, no, similar vibes.
Mhm.
I was also just a contrarian asshole back then, and so I was like, yeah, I understand that this is there's the villain here, and there's definitely some bad shit in the history of the Soviet Union. But I remember being reading Animal Farm and the whole like first half of it being like, yeah, they're right. Why are you booing them? They're right.
In the 10th grade for summer reading, and I promise we will get back to Hobbits, but this is just fun. I had to read, I think the book was called Thank You for Arguing, and it was about rhetorical strategies and logical fallacies and stuff and debate techniques. And that was a dangerous weapon to give little 10th grade me because I was already kind of obnoxious and pretentious and liked to be right and liked to bring justice down upon people who were wrong. And so then giving me actual tools and then calling out my fucking siblings on their straw man fallacies. Oh, I was so obnoxious, but it was really fun. But back to Hobbitsies. So at this point, they're about 70 miles from Bag End, but word has gone ahead to the chief about their arrival. So they skip visiting Crick Hollow and just go straight on towards Bag End. And there's ominous smoke in the air, and it's just continuing to get more uncomfortable. And then they reach another barrier in the road.
Yes, as they approach Frogmorton, which is a fucking stellar name for a town.
Oh, I love it. It reminds me of your cousin Throckmorton, the skateboarder.
Of course, my cousin Throckmorton and his 900
Is it watermelon?
watermelons, usually. I think it's
Yeah.
watermelons. But now, as we're hearing more names for towns, I'm realizing how fucking funny Hobbiton is as a name for a town. Because,
Hmm.
like, the other village names make sense. Mickle Delving means large excavation, and it's the biggest town in the Shire,
Oh,
which makes
did
sense
not
when
know that.
hobbits mostly lived in hobbit holes. Buckland makes sense. It's like plenty of big families in our world have settled areas and been like, ah, yes, this is our land, and we shall call it this
This
land.
land. I think
As
we should
opposed to,
call it your grave.
curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. Bywater is by the water. Underhill, Woodhall, Tuckborough, Deep Hollow. They all follow these sort of like place name conventions, right?
Hmm.
But Hobbiton is like, ah, yes, I am a human from Humanville.
Human city, nice to meet you. Welcome to my normal human town.
I am a normal human person. But anyway, they approach Frogmorton and they're stopped by a bunch of sheriffs, which I'm going to pronounce like this to distinguish it from our word sheriff, which has the same root. It's spelled exactly the same, except the E in sheriff is changed to an I, and then an extra R is added, and you get sheriff.
Sheriff.
But it comes from the words Shire Reeve,
Oh,
which Shire is a region, and Reeve is a representative of the local lord or local authority.
all right. I should not question any silly new Tolkien words at this point. I just thought, oh, this is a dumb way to spell sheriff, and it's a little bit silly. No, of course, there's an important linguistic history to it. I shouldn't have been surprised by that.
I mean, it is a way to spell sheriff, more or less,
Hmm.
but there is sort of in keeping with the sort of pseudo 17th century nature of the Shire, keeping it a little closer to the old Shire Reeve
Hmm.
is kind of interesting. An interesting linguistic choice. Sheriffs initially only had 12 of them throughout the whole Shire, 3 in each farthing. But clearly their numbers have expanded, which is again an authoritarian tactic of expanding the size and powers and armament of law enforcement such that people are afraid to defy decrees and laws for fear of punishment.
Hmm.
The police and by extension sheriffs are just an occupying army holding a threat of violence over the heads of the people.
Naturally.
Laws are threats.
I think Socrates said that.
I'm sure Brennan Lee Mulligan would be very happy to hear you're referring to him as Socrates.
No, that's just what I say anytime somebody deliberately quotes someone. It's usually I'll say, I think Socrates said that, or I think Rumi said that. Those are my two misattributed quote go-tos. There is some more discussion about the changing roles of the sheriffs, but before that, there's more tone setting, more things to put a pin in about authority. The first impression is that there's a barrier in the road, and behind it stood a large band of sheriffs with staves in their hands and feathers in their caps, looking both important and rather scared. And there is this discomfort that they have with this role that they've been kind of shoved into. And we see that manifesting through all of their interactions. And the sheriffs tell our party all of the various crimes that they're accused of: gate breaking, tearing up of rules, assaulting gatekeepers, trespassing, sleeping in Shire buildings without leave, and bribing guards with food. And then we get another great comeback from Sam. I can add some more if you'd like it, said Sam, calling your chief names, wishing to punch his pimply face, and thinking you sheriffs look a lot of tomfools. He is just having absolutely none of this. And the guards are trying to stay serious and saying that they're going to take them in custody. And all of our hobbits literally laugh at them. And Frodo says that they're going to Bag End. And if the sheriffs want to come, that's fine, but it's none of their business. And then one of them says, very well, Mr. Baggins, said the leader, pushing the barrier aside. But don't forget, I've arrested you.
And Frodo's response to this is, I won't. Never. But I may forgive you.
Stone cold, Frodo.
Uh-huh. And then also is like, I want to go to the inn. I'm tired. It's bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
And are informed, there's no inn. And also we're in prohibition here, which is again another authoritarian tactic of claiming that leisure activities are somehow dangerous or immoral, and anything that could promote social bonds is banned as a threat to the state.
Mm-hmm.
TikTok ban.
Off TikTok. And we have another instance of a hobbit getting recognized. Sam spots one of the sheriffs he knows and calls him out. And this is where we learn what you said before, that sheriffs are an existing institution in the Shire that just kind of involved traveling around and generally keeping an eye on things, but now their work has changed significantly. And the sheriff Robin, Sam asks him why he doesn't just quit if the work isn't honorable anymore, because Robin had been a sheriff previously. And he's not satisfied with Robin's answer that he's not allowed to quit, which another thing we can put a pin in for later about power and authority. But hobbits really don't like to rock the boat. And there's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
of this complicity and accepting these orders being handed down totally arbitrarily on the part of hobbits at large, which is partially responsible for a lot of the bullshit. But I do like Sam calling the other hobbits out and telling them that that answer isn't good enough, because it's not.
Right. As the sheriffs go from being sort of a local peacekeeping presence to cops, we have to understand that there is only one way to be a good cop, and that is to quit.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I noticed as we meet Robin Smallborough, Sam refers to him as Cock Robin, which is just a name for a male robin. And a quick bird aside,
Please.
American robins that many of our listeners may be used to seeing and are sort of like heralds of spring are not, in fact, robins. They're thrushes.
Ooh, spicy.
European robins, or robin redbreasts, which Tolkien was referring to with this or would have been more familiar with, are flycatchers. They're smaller, but still very, very cute. And I'll put
Oh my
images of
god, they're
both.
so cute. I'm on the Wikipedia page for them right now.
They're so fucking round.
Oh my god, I love. Oh, there's one with a mealworm in its mouth. Good for you, buddy.
Yeah, I'll put images of both on our socials for this week because they're so
Yes.
fucking cute.
Oh, they're really cute. Oh, their eggs are only 2 centimeters long. Oh.
They're fucking mini. But
Mhm.
anyway, when Sam sort of calls out Robin and says one of the lines that I really appreciated from Sam when Robin says he's not allowed to quit. Sam's response is, "If I hear not allowed much oftener, I'm going to get angry, and
Mm.
you won't like me when I'm angry." Um, and Robin is like, "We should all get angry together, and maybe we could make shit happen that way.
Mm.
Collective power, let's go." Anyway, the other thing that I love how fucking stone cold all the travelers are.
Mhm.
The next morning, they get up to head to Bywater, and it says they would have started earlier, only the delay so plainly annoyed the sheriff leader. And going back to sort of your thought about authority is, on the one hand, the sheriff leader is the authority here. And on the other hand, he's arresting three members of basically what amounts to nobility in the
Mhm.
Shire, and he's clearly not part of that social class.
Mhm.
And so sort of he's clearly uncomfortable with exercising that power over them.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered the class aspect, but you're right. Yeah.
I think the class aspect permeates everything in this. I'll bring it up a couple of more.
It does, and I always forget that. Please do keep bringing it up because I forget that we have some fancy hobbits and Sam.
Who's going to make his way into the higher social class at
Oh,
the end of all
yes.
of this. But anyway, the sheriffs are supposedly escorting the prisoners, but they're marching ahead as the party rides behind, chatting and singing, except for
Mhm.
Frodo, who's all contemplative. And this makes an old man watching laugh at the sheriffs.
Mhm.
And two of them go to like rough him up or arrest him until Mary orders them to stop.
Yeah.
And then again, more stone cold responses to things. And after that, the travelers saw to it that their pony's pace was quick enough to push the sheriffs along as fast as they could go. Basically being like, you can't be assholes if you're too tired.
And they get too tired because as they continue going, the sheriffs physically can't keep up with our party because they're not used to long travel days. And so they just leave. and but not without reminding our party that they're breaking a rest.
And Pippin's response is, "We shall break a good many things yet and not ask you to answer. Good luck to you."
Yes.
Pippin's like, "I'm going to cause problems and it won't be your problem. Fuck off."
Love him. Love Pippin. So they arrive in Bywater, and it's in a bad state. Many of the houses that were there before are gone now. A lot of them are burned down. All of the trees are gone. And there's a huge tower that's belching this black smoke that we had seen before. And Sam rides off to find his gaffer. And this is where I have to admit something to you and
Mm.
to our audience, which is that I had no idea what gaffer means this whole time. And I didn't Google it until just now in preparation for this episode because I didn't know why that's what Sam calls his dad. And apparently it's just slang for old man. Because when I think of gaffer, I think of somebody who works on like a film set, just
Yeah.
doing electrical stuff. And so I knew that it had to have some other meaning, but I just never bothered to find out. So now I know, and maybe anyone else who also didn't know but was too afraid to admit it, now they also know. It just means old man.
There's also Gammer, which gets brought up later on too, which
Oh,
is
I
old
missed that
woman.
one.
Gaffers and Gammers.
Mhm.
They encounter a bunch of ruffians
Yes, men, not hobbits.
and potentially half-orcs as well.
Ooh.
Sort of the descriptions of the men suggests that they're half-orc like.
Because Mary does say that they remind him of the men from Isengard, and it seems like they might actually be from Isengard, but they weren't there when all the shit with the Ents went down. But it seems to be implied over the course of their conversation that they are, I guess, Isengardian, whatever you call someone from there.
Yeah, and Saruman earlier on, as is noted here, like the friend of Bill Ferny's at Bree, he'd sent his agents out into the land.
Hmm.
And so not all of Sauron's men were at Isengard when it fell.
Yeah.
And so whether all of them came from Isengard or only some of them and recruited other ne'er-do-wells on their journey, it doesn't particularly matter. The only thing that matters is that there is some connection to Saruman, and this is the first hints we're getting of that here.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this conversation, which I did not fully get. But the main thing that we learn is that Lotho answers to someone called Sharky. And we hear about the men's prejudice against hobbits, some rumblings about swapping one boss out for another if the current one doesn't suit their plans. So Lotho is just kind of their puppet, but he doesn't really matter. Mary talking about how they remind him of the men from Isengard. And there's threats and blustering. And Frodo informs the men that that's cute, that's fine, but they're clearly behind the times, and Isengard has fallen, and the king's messengers are riding on, and fuck you. And one of the men gives them shit about it. And who is the one? I think is it Mer? Is
Pippin.
it Pippin? Yeah. So Pippin steps to this guy. He cast back his cloak, flashed out his sword, and the silver and sable of Gondor gleamed on him as he rode forward. I am a messenger of the king, he said. You are speaking to the king's friend and one of the most renowned in all the lands of the West. You are a ruffian and a fool. Down on your knees in the road and ask pardon, or I will set this troll's bane in you. The sword glinted in the westering sun. Merry and Sam drew their swords and also rode up to support Pippin, but Frodo did not move. The ruffians gave back. Scaring Breland peasants and bullying bewildered hobbits had been their work. Fearless hobbits with bright swords and grim faces were a great surprise, and there was a note in the voices of these newcomers that they had not heard before. It chilled them with fear.
Again, bullies are fundamentally cowards.
Mm-hmm.
But they run them off, and our hobbits have a quick consultation on what to do next. Pippin wants to go after Lotho and destroy him. But Frodo says, like, this isn't really on Lotho. Like, yeah, he started it, but he let shit get out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
And even, Lotho's authoritarian tendencies allowed an even worse authoritarian to come in and fuck things up. And it's a you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas type thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's sort of what's happened with both the GOP and the Democrats in the last 50 years,
Mm.
which is, you lie down with, some people with sort of vaguely conservative policies and keep compromising and compromising and compromising. And the hard right keeps going, well, we keep shifting the Overton window. What's acceptable to compromise on just keeps shifting right.
Mm-hmm.
Until now, you're looking at literal fucking Nazis in the halls of power. Not that there ever haven't been since the 40s. Highly, highly recommend, if you have the mental fortitude for it right now. Rachel Maddow presents Ultra, which is a really interesting discussion of Nazi sympathizers in the US up through like between the 50s and like the 80s or something.
We can
And
link that in the
yeah.
episode description.
Oh yeah, it was a really cool 2-season podcast on sort of right-wing power and Nazi sympathizers in Congress
Mm-hmm.
and how they remained after World War II. Anyway, Frodo also reveals that there's never been any Hobbit on Hobbit killing in the Shire,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. There are no murderers. Hobbits are, at their core, a fundamentally peaceful people,
Mm-hmm.
which is what makes this whole situation so much sadder. Any animal will bite or fight or defend itself if backed into a corner, if it feels threatened, and that includes people.
Yeah.
It's the fight, flight, or freeze response. But it's really sad to see these community oriented, peaceful people be driven to violence to defend their homes.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary brings this up. basically, saying that there's a lot of these thieves, these ruffians, and you won't rescue Lotho or the Shire just by being shocked and sad, my dear Frodo. One of my favorite books I read last year was Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is subtitled The Necessity of Violence. And one of the arguments it makes is that imperialism and authoritarianism are inherently violent, and so only will recognize the oppressed if they too take up arms in violence. And so Mary hinting the idea that like thoughts and prayers won't solve this. It's going to take action
Mhm.
is sort of in line with this idea of like it is violence necessary to defeat oppression. I'm I'm fundamentally a pacifist. I like to believe that violence should never be necessary, but so often it's wielded as a tool of the oppressor that sometimes like the oppressed must respond in kind as a form of defense. And so I pose a few questions that I was sort
Yeah,
of
let's
trying to
hear
keep in
him.
mind throughout the rest of the chapter. It was, when is violent resistance justified? What provides justification for violence? And what qualifies as resistance rather than violence in kind?
Mm.
And I don't necessarily have answers to these questions, but these were things I was thinking about as I was reading the rest of this.
I remember in one of my gender studies seminars in schools, we were talking about the prison system, and that was my first introduction to the idea of prison abolition. And one of the things that we were talking about was the law's relationship to violence, as Socrates slash Brennan Lee Mulligan pointed out. And I remember having my mind blown by the idea that laws aren't there to prevent violence. They decide who gets to wield it. The state wants to own violence. The state wants to control
Yes.
violence and inflict it upon whoever is convenient at the time. And that really reframed things for me. It rewired my brain. I don't know if I could confidently describe myself as a pacifist. I have never personally inflicted physical violence on another person besides like beating up my siblings when I was younger. Sorry. But conceptually, I think that it's complicated. I used to live with someone, Miles and I had an old housemate who was a Quaker and very committed to nonviolence in all things. And just non-confrontation in general, to a point that was a little confusing to me, and I had had some conversations with him about it because he really walked the walk in terms of being committed to nonviolence in all ways. And even if I one time made a joke about bringing back the guillotine to go cut off Elon Musk's head or something, he was genuinely very concerned and looked at me and went, "That was a joke, right?" And I was like, "Yes, housemate name. I am not actually going to kill someone with a guillotine." But even the idea of joking about violence was completely unthinkable. And I've respected that he, I guess to say stuck to his guns would be inappropriate since guns are a weapon. But he stuck to his convictions, and I respect that. But it was really interesting to have those conversations with him. But they were very respectful conversations because he was a really respectable guy. But I
Yeah,
don't think that I could get on the same page with him about being that hardcore about it.
I sort of frequently have to think about my devotion to pacifism and whether that's sort of just for me, again, these questions that I posed are questions that live in my brain kind of constantly.
And questions that just humanity is always thinking about.
Yes, of
These aren't things we
course.
can answer on a podcast.
No, we're distinctly not qualified for that. We are two dykes with mics.
Mhm.
That this my desire not to see violence committed does not stop me from making jokes about dead CEOs to my friends.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a time and a place. It's all the fucking interconnected web of suffering, man.
Anyway, speaking of resistance, Mary says they need to raise the Shire now.
Mhm.
to incite a rebellion before the ruffians have a chance to regroup and, God, what's the word? Enact revenge? Seek retribution?
Sure, something like that.
I have retribution written down and I was looking for like the verb.
Retaliate?
Retaliate, thank you.
Hey.
Sam goes to Tom Cotton's, is Rosie Cotton's father, because he's sort of a local leader and has a bunch of lads, quote unquote. Are they all his sons? Are they family? Like, where is who are
Are
the
they his personal
lads?
male harem who he keeps around because he's a bisexual little freak? I don't know.
Yes, who are the lads? Mary goes out and raises the horn cry of Buckland, blowing the horn of Rohan.
It's the fear fire foes cry again.
Hmm. But this time it's not actually in fear. This time it's in defiance,
Mhm.
which is a really interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, I liked that.
I really loved this description of the horn cry. It was far over hill and field it echoed, and so compelling was that call that Sam himself almost turned and dashed back.
Oh.
I love the imagery of something being so compelling that you simply can't sit by and
Mhm.
watch. And, I think the only reason that Sam didn't turn back was because he was already going to work towards the same goal, just
Yeah.
away. Anyway, you were saying.
Yeah, so Sam goes to the Cotton's farm, and Rosie is upset with him because he took his sweet fucking time getting back. It implies that there had maybe been some conversation between the two of them before he left about when and if he expected to return, and or that she had gotten news about Minas Tirith being saved and had assumed he'd be coming back sooner. She is not happy. And she tells him to just go back and get Frodo because why bother looking after him all this time if he's just going to leave him now? And Sam is overwhelmed by the existential nature of this question. And so he's just faced with the choice to either give her an answer that would take a week or say nothing. So he just turns around and leaves, which is a little bit sad because he's having a hard time expressing everything that he's been through, but it's also just a little bit funny that he's so overwhelmed. He just goes, I cannot do this right now, and just dips. Just a little
Well,
bit
I
of the
mean,
old Sam.
well, and he only goes in to see them to make sure that they're defended
Mhm.
by Nibs.
I don't know who Nibs is, but he's got a pitchfork, so good luck out there, Nibs.
I get the feeling that Nibs is probably like the youngest
Oh,
male Cotton.
the
I'm
littlest
just
lad.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like probably like a 14, 15-year-old hobbit or whatever the equivalent is in hobbit years with a pitchfork.
The rallying of the lads also just gives me flashbacks to elementary school and a teacher saying that she needs some strong boys to help move desks or something. And me going, I want to move a desk. What the fuck is this? Inequality.
Oh, it's definitely that because like
Where are the lasses?
are Rosie and Mrs. Cotton completely incapable of wielding a bow or a spear or what have you? Like they have to be defended by the youngest Cotton.
Hmm.
I mean, we don't know if Nibs is older or younger than Rosie, but I sort of get the sense that because he wasn't out with, I'm assuming, all of his older brothers with axes in the road, that like he's been left behind also as a last line of defense, but also because he needs defending himself,
Hmm.
which to my mind positions him as a child.
Yeah.
Therefore, as a child, why is he the one entrusted with protecting his sister and mother?
Yeah.
Sexism
Yay.
on the part of
Hobbit
our
gender
author.
norms.
I'm not going to attribute that to hobbits because we've discussed hobbit gender extensively on this podcast. I'm going to
That's
attribute
fair.
that to our author.
So after this, Pippin rides off to go gather some tooks. Farmer Cotton lures some ruffians into a trap surrounded by archers, which is very impressive. And Mary is really taking charge and showing some really impressive military leadership in this whole thing.
It's fun to see Merry taking charge because also Merry also has Took in him, if we
Mhm.
recall. His mother was a Took.
Indeed.
And we've established here that the Tooks are the fighters of the Hobbit world.
Mhm.
And the Thane of Tookland or Tuckborough is sort of the closest thing to a military leader that hobbits have. And so it's not surprising now to see somebody of Took heritage taking over.
Yeah.
We sort of get a little rundown on what has gone on.
Yeah, I wrote, Farmer Cotton catches Frodo up on how this shitstorm started.
Right. Lotho took to calling himself Chief Sheriff, which makes sense. It becomes more or less a military coup,
Mhm.
which is like he positions himself as an authority. And as that sort of quote unquote peacekeeping or law enforcement authority, arrests the only other authority in the Shire, the Mayor of Mickle-Delving. And we've mentioned that like the mayor doesn't have a lot of responsibilities or authority, again, for lack of a better word, but is more or less sort of the biggest official in the Shire.
Mhm.
You know, he is the one who folks would look to for leadership besides like the Thane of Tuckborough.
Yeah.
But the Tooks are kind of like insular, they keep to themselves. And so for everyone else who was looking to Mickle-Delving, by Lotho deposing Will Whitfoot, the mayor, and making the sheriffs into his direct subordinates, he can sort of wield them as a private army and position himself as a moral and legal authority in that case.
And we also learn that Lotho had kind of started off with more property than was good for him, and he just kept buying up more and more of the Shire with money that no one knows how he got. And we find out how he got it, which is he is the one who had been quietly sending away pipeweed to Isengard and then got bolder and bolder sending too much away out of the Shire until it couldn't be ignored anymore, basically. And then that's when the gangs of men sweep in, the mayor gets locked up. No one has seen Sharky, but he's clearly the one who's actually in charge. And the situation has devolved to a point where, quote, there's no longer even any bad sense in it, unquote. Whereas you are fond of saying, the cruelty is the point. We have moved totally beyond anything that could possibly be justified in any way to just total authoritarianism.
And this is something to take note of because this has all happened incredibly quickly. We are now in early November, and they left the previous September.
Mhm.
So it's been just over a year for all of this to happen. And there's some other timing points, which I'll bring up in a little bit, which on the one hand is like, that seems really fast. On the other, in the last few years, we've seen how quickly culture can change or how, quickly whole nations can shut down, how much violence can be enacted in a short time by state and non state actors. The idea of going from, hey, some rich guy is fucking with things, to that rich guy's a dictator and all of us live in fear in the span of a few months is not out of the question for us.
Mhm.
And it really sort of highlights the importance of standing up to even the little things that you think are kind of innocuous,
Mhm.
because we let the little things go by and then the big things happen. It's kind of like it's that poem of, first they came for the what da-da, and then
Yeah.
next they came for the until there was nobody to speak for you when they come for you. But with property rights and import export shit, like, I don't know, I little tongue tied, but
No, I get
you
you.
get the point.
And there's a line earlier too about how the hobbits have been so comfortable for so long that they're kind of primed to be taken advantage of because they have been existing so peacefully. They're not used to this kind of conflict and they don't have the skills or recent cultural memory to know how to deal with it, which I guess we can save this for, more power reflections at the end. But I am wrestling with how culpable the hobbits at large are for not standing up to Lotho and Saruman more. How much could they reasonably have been expected to do? Do we feel like the everyday people did everything we could? Some people did stand up to Lotho, and then they got fucking sent to jail. Lobelia, unfortunately, to put a point in her favor, she stood up to the ruffians, and she got sent to jail and no one misses her, but at least she had a fighting spirit, and that counts.
Mhm.
So all of the people who did say something were swiftly punished and separated from the rest of society. It's a complicated question that I don't have a satisfactory answer to, but I'm thinking about it. So we get caught up on the history and how things have gotten to this point. The gaffer shows up with Sam and immediately berates Frodo and says that he never should have sold Bag End,
This
which,
is your fault, asshole.
why did he sell his beautiful hole? That's a question that we must revisit. And then he says, "And I hope my Sam's behaved himself and given satisfaction." And I was just like, yeah, I'm sure he has. And then
Yeah, he
Frodo
comforted,
says,
Frodo with his body.
"Oh yes, with his hands and body." And then Frodo says, "Perfect satisfaction, Mr. Gamgee," said Frodo, which I'm sure was accompanied by Sam turning the color of a cooked lobster and Frodo doing some kind of eyebrow waggle and or wink. But then it turns wholesome and says, "Indeed, if you will believe it, he's now one of the most famous people in all the lands, and they are making songs about his deeds from here to the sea and beyond the great river." Which is nice that he's hyping up Sam because Sam deserves it, but also, come on, it's giving satisfaction, of course. And I'm sure he got plenty of satisfaction too, but Sam's a giver. What can we say?
He's a surface top. We've
Mhm.
established this.
We have.
You cannot tell me that this is not a father-in-law partner interaction.
I was just about to say that. Yes.
Like, I'm sorry, who else acts like this with their employer? No, this is absolutely a father turning to his kid's partner and being, you know, it, a little, I'm going to polish my gun at the kitchen table
Oh my
while we
God.
have a chat.
And I have another thing to add to this little exchange that's happening in my mind.
Mm.
Frodo and Rosie high five.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. This nod, high five, perfect satisfaction. Hell yeah. Anyway.
Bell Eiffel Tower Sam later.
And that's beautiful. I think that's what Sam deserves, frankly.
Anyway, the Thane of the Tooks raise the Tooks and are pursuing the ruffians that were watching Tookland. Pippin is on his way back with 100 more Tooks, but there's 100 ruffians headed towards them, and they lay the same trap that they laid in Hobbian for the other ruffians the other night, but it doesn't work quite as well, and fighting breaks out and
Mhm.
results in the end 70 ruffians dead, a dozen captured, with 19 hobbits killed and 30 wounded. And apparently this is the Battle of Bywater.
Mhm.
And we get again sort of this section that like travels with us through time as if this is a historical retelling.
Mhm.
Now, it was remembered for generations to come. It would be the second ever and the last battle ever fought in the Shire. It would be recorded in the Red Book, and apparently, because of Tom Cotton's role, the Cotton family would become quite famous and powerful later on.
Mhm.
I'm sure being connected to one of the travelers and heroes from the great stories didn't hurt either.
I was kind of shocked to think about 19 dead hobbits and 30 wounded. That's a lot. That's a lot of fucking dead hobbits. And I did like that in that same section that's sort of taking us through time. It says, "And the names of all those who took a part were made into a roll and learned by heart by Shire historians." And then, like you said, talking about the Cottons, "The very considerable rise in the fame and fortune of the Cottons dates from this time. But at the top of the roll, in all accounts, stand the names of Captains Meriadoc and Peregrine," which I did like.
Yeah, they're just constantly going to be in this section of history.
Mhm.
Um, is just, and Pippin is here again, and Mary's here again.
But just think about from before when I think it was Pippin, might have been Mary, I don't know, fucking one of them was saying talking about how he felt like a piece of luggage and was totally useless and out of his depth, to now being these super capable military leaders. It's
Mhm.
great. I like that they're confident.
Anyway, they ride up after lunch to Bag End, and the area around it is fucking bleak. And what finally breaks Sam is that they've cut down the party tree.
Yeah.
And we get to meet Ted Sandyman, who is a hobbit who is fully gone to the dark side.
Hmm.
And he's like tossing insults and, doing the French taunter thing of your father was a hamster and your mother smelt a hilt of elderberries.
I think it was the other way around. Your mother was a hamster and your father smelled of elderberries.
Maybe they were an elderberry smelling hamster. You don't know.
Maybe. I mean, I think the implication is that the mother was like a rodent slut and the father was drunk on elderberry liquor. But
That
regardless,
makes sense. Mary is like, hey, fuck you. We already dealt with all of your friends. And when Ted goes off to like blow a warning horn, Mary goes, I can do better than that. And pulls out his horn. I was going to say it's a little dick measuring contesty, but he uses the Horn of Rohan to call out the hobbits of Hobbiton, who all start yelling and cheering down the hill.
I also just had a connection of neurons in my brain thinking about the Tiffany Aching books. I forget what I don't know if it's the We Free Men books, whatever the official designation of that little subset of Discworld is called, but they're the ones about the little witch Tiffany Aching. And there's a lot of talk about the people in her village generally being peaceful, but when things get tough, when it comes out that a man has been abusing his wife or somebody's done something wrong and there needs to be some kind of retribution, the people in their town don't have weapons, they don't have swords, but they have a lot of things that aren't weapons. They have not weapons in the form of pitchforks and knives and other things. And the more that tensions increase, the more those not weapons start to be very appealing. And the more people see the potential for violence or for different applications of various parts of their everyday lives. And so I was thinking about that too, of that, these hobbits aren't armed in the traditional sense, but for better or worse, they're all coming out with axes and pitchforks and torches and stuff, and they're ready to make a show of things.
Well, and historically, that has always been the case of, when you raise a peasant army who does not have experience with weaponry necessarily, you hand them a polearm because it's similar enough to a tool that they've used for most of their life. And so many polearms are more or less derivatives of agricultural tools for that exact reason. When, you get a peasant rebellion marching with billhooks, there's not much difference from a billhook used on a farm to a billhook used in a military sense.
Mm-hmm.
Besides perhaps a slightly broader blade. And in many places in history, peasants were forbidden from owning or carrying weapons. And so to defend themselves from bandits or from overzealous lords or to rise up when they were being oppressed, they either were there with their agricultural tools or they disguised weapons as tools. If you're walking along with a quarterstaff, you're just an old man. You would not part an old man from his walking stick,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that walking stick is, if it's iron shod on the bottom, can still break somebody's skull. You might not be able to own a sword, but you can own a big fucking knife. Or the Lord doesn't know what an agricultural tool is. If you say, yeah, that hook is definitely for pulling apples off of trees, but it works just as well for pulling a knight off a horse so you can beat him to death. Yeah, always been the case.
Mm-hmm.
People make do with what they have access to.
Sort of taking in this whole situation and all the destruction, Sam says that this is worse than Mordor because all of this destruction and violence has come into their home. And then Frodo says that this is Mordor because it's one of Sauron's works at Saruman's hands. And that was just so fucking good and poetic in that, Mordor isn't a place, it's an idea, it's a philosophy, it's a regime. And I didn't really have more to add to that, but I just wanted to point out that it was a really good line.
Oh, absolutely. And as soon as they connect it to Saruman, all of a sudden, like fucking Beetlejuice, there's Saruman.
Yeah, they open the door to Bag End and Saruman is there. I cannot express how fucking shocked I was at this revelation. I was not expecting it at all. It's
Oh, same. When I first read it, absolutely.
I don't know if it's just because the books and movies are so long, there's so much of them. We've talked about my vague cultural awareness of Lord of the Rings that I had going into this. I don't feel like there is a vague cultural awareness of how these books end. There's stuff
No.
about the middle. There's hobbits exist, and Gandalf is the guy with the hat and the beard and stuff, and there's rings and they're bad, and Gollum goes, "My precious." Those are things that we all generally know. But I had absolutely no idea that any of this would happen, but especially that Saruman would fucking show up. It was it paid off. The surprise was there. I was not expecting it whatsoever.
Well, and again, I think the fact that these scenes are not in the movies adds to that lack of cultural awareness and therefore the suspense of this chapter.
Yeah, I had no idea what was going to happen at any given moment. And Saruman, because we had seen him already on the road, and I kind of thought that was the end of him. But he's there. He is, despite being less magical, is still dramatic. And he has some fucking prime jabs for them. I just imagine this being in an extremely whiny voice that they say his voice is still powerful and can move you, but I just imagine it being a little annoying. He says, Saruman's home could be all wrecked and he could be turned out, but no one could touch yours. Oh no, Gandalf would look after your affairs. And there's some more stuff. Not he. When his tools have done their task, he drops them. But you must go dangling after him, dawdling and talking, and riding round twice as far as needed. And so he's shitting on them for destroying his home, shitting on Gandalf, saying that they're just his tools and Gandalf doesn't care about them. And it's threatening, but it's also just kind of pathetic. Oh my god, I just forgot that I had written Saruman is a real snarky sharky.
Yes, we do learn that Saruman is Sharky. And we get a rare footnote here,
Oh, yes, we do.
which I looked back, I was trying to remember if Tolkien had used footnotes in the past, and he has, but it's usually to direct us to particular parts of the appendices.
Hmm.
And the copy that I'm looking at is a collection of all three volumes collected into one book, as the professor wanted. So I'm not like 100% sure if the individual books have the same footnotes or where certain appendices appear. Regardless, the footnote we get here is in defining potentially the etymological origins of Sharky in Orcish Sharku for old man. And I almost have to wonder whether Sharky came first or Sharku came first.
Hmm.
Did Tolkien sort of reverse etymologize,
Etymologize?
I guess?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right.
This, or did he, go from language to nickname? Which, Tolkien being who he is, who knows? But yeah, we get that villain monologue that you were mentioning,
Hmm.
which, rule one, magic makes you dramatic.
Hmm.
And I feel like this almost deserves its own rule of fantasy, which I believe
Tell
would be
me
rule
more.
6.
Okay.
To be a true villain, they must monologue.
Mm. Did Sauron monologue? I don't have we heard him talk directly? He's just kind of existed as
No,
an idea.
right. Sauron is a concept of evil. He's not a villain.
True, 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 true. You're so right. Villain as in antagonist role in the story.
Yes.
Yeah, Bill Ferny talks shit. Does talking shit count as monologuing if they talk shit for long enough?
I think so. I I mean maybe let's see. We can workshop the structure of the rule. But I think the connection of villain to monologue needs to be established as a universal
Maybe
rule of fantasy.
maybe that you can identify a villain by their monologuing. It's not that villains must monologue, because villains might not, but if there is monologuing, that is an indication in the direction of villainy.
Not necessarily, well, because you sometimes get, monologues on hope and
Mm,
wonder. We'll workshop it, but I do think that this deserves its own space in our universal rules of fantasy.
I think so too. Isn't there something in the long list of rules for villains? Are there things in there about monologuing?
Oh, absolutely. Hang on. There's a few different evil overlord rules. This was published as a list in 1990, and it was initially positioned as like a what not to do when you capture James Bond, because
Mhm.
the James Bond villain is such a perfect archetypal villain. But the evil overlord rules contain rules such as I will not gloat over my enemy's predicament before killing them. When I've captured my adversary and he says, "Look, before you kill me, will you at least tell me what this is all about?" I'll say no and shoot him. On second thought, I'll shoot him and then say no. Things like that, sort of. I will never utter the sentence, but before I kill you, there's just one thing I want to know.
Mhm.
All of these, absolutely, you must, as a villain, resist the urge to monologue because that will be your downfall.
Mhm. He does continue to monologue, of course, and claims that there will be a curse laid upon anyone who harms him, which may or may not be true. But Frodo is not interested in finding out whether or not this is true or perpetuating the cycle of violence. But Sam draws his sword and is ready to fucking strike Saruman down. And I think this may be a good point to pause and let us come back in part 2, where we will finish this chapter, talk about what happens to Saruman, and then move on to the Grey Havens.
Yes. So, in that case, thank you for listening. We didn't expect to have this much to say about this singular chapter. So, next time you'll be able to catch the end of this chapter and all of our discussion of the final chapter of the Lord of the Rings saga, chapter 9, The Grey Havens. If you like what you're hearing, give us a follow on whatever podcasting platform you're listening on if you have not already. Leave us a 5-star review if the platform you're listening on allows that sort of thing, a like, a comment. Feel free to follow us on social media, whatever social media exists when this comes out. We primarily have used Insta, but we're also on X and Blue Sky and Tumblr. And so, whatever of those exists by the time this comes out and isn't completely overrun by Nazis, you can find us there. You can
Yeah.
also, yeah, you can also always send us an email at thefandomapprentice@gmail.com. And until next time, be wary of authoritarianism. You are not immune to propaganda. And we'll talk more about that next time because I have end of chapter commentary, but it is end of chapter commentary.
All right. See y'all next time. Bye.
The Phantom Apprentice is produced and edited by Rin and Sam. Our music was composed and performed by James, and our art is by Casey Turgeon. This podcast is created for non-commercial entertainment purposes, and the opinions expressed therein are our own and are not reflective of the opinions of any other person or organization. The content discussed is the property of the Tolkien estate and is used here under fair use.